there have been multiple points where, and I'm not saying that I'm for it or against it, where if the Democratic Party was for codified abortion access, they could have done it. They had super majorities at multiple times and they did not.
That's
Do
right.
you think that's more to do with them needing it as a rallying cry or wanting it as a divisive issue? Or do you think it's just something that they weren't willing to deal with or just wanted their heads in the sand about?
Well, it's hard to avoid the conclusion that this was just a fundraising tactic they didn't want to give up. Because they did have the opportunity over and over again. And even more recently, when they didn't have a supermajority, but they had a majority, they had the option to change some of the rules about where a supermajority was needed. The Republicans did that. They did that in order to move through judicial appointments short of the two-thirds majority. They moved that to a simple majority. And the Democrats had the same power to modify the rules of the game, so they could have, they could have changed, the rules of the road there and moved it and codified Roe, even when they didn't have a supermajority. But both Barack Obama and Joe Biden had said that this would be the first thing that they did when they were elected to office, and they did not do that. And Obama in particular had 2 years of a supermajority in Congress when it was going to be the first thing, but somehow then it was like the last thing. So why is that? I think it reflects that we are not the priority. We, the people, are not the priority. It was Wall Street that was the priority from the get-go. And so it just wasn't, what was the first thing Obama did? He appointed Larry Summers to the Department of Treasury, Larry Summers, who had basically trashed the protections, the Glass-Steagall Act. That was Larry Summers, who basically laid the groundwork for the crash of.
We talk about that a lot.
Yes,
A lot.
exactly. And that really kind of revealed Obama's hand and where he was. Let me just ask you, there's a heater which is buzzing here. Are you hearing background buzz?
Nope, you sound great.
Okay, great. All right, terrific.
Everybody agree with me on that? Yeah. Okay. I'm going to take you down to James Lee, who is an investigative reporter that covers a wide diversity of issues. He is really a citizens journalist, but he came from the world of big corporate wealth management and development. And he has some really interesting questions. I'm going to go down to James, and we're going to see which he is most motivated after hearing what you said so far to start with.
Hello, thank you, Dr. Stein, for being here, and that's a lovely way to put my credentials, Tiffany. But yes, I do a lot of citizen journalism work. I come from the corporate I have a corporate background. I'm an MBA grad. I did management consulting for a number of years, specifically in big pharma during COVID. I have some stories that I won't talk about here, but my question is somewhat related to that. I wanted to ask you about universal health care. I know Medicare for All is a big pillar for the Green Party. I personally believe that people should have access to affordable health care. Everybody, that should be a human right. But my question is around sort of the collusion between government and business when it comes to healthcare. We know that universal healthcare, Medicare for All, necessarily means that it's government healthcare, and we saw during COVID government health officials, Anthony Fauci, CDC, I would say disregarding science, whether it be about mask wearing, social distancing. That this has all come out, changing quarantine periods based on feedback from CEOs, this type of stuff. And now we know that they were trying to circumvent FOIAs to hide their involvement with gain of function research, closing businesses. I know that's impacted a few people in here, as well as many regular Americans. And I was watching, you mentioned the congressional hearings. I was listening to the congressional hearings, and the Democrats are basically, hailing him, Fauci specifically, as a hero. Republicans seem to be attacking him for purely partisan reasons. Now, I'm curious to hear, what are your thoughts about Fauci's leadership? Because a lot of people will point to him and say, how can the government be trusted to run healthcare? And do you think he should be held accountable for basically lying to Americans?
Yeah, okay. Those are all really great points and great questions. First, let me just say that Medicare for All is not a government healthcare system. What it is government facilitated insurance so that there's only one insurer. Basically, it's a simplification of insurance. Right now, insurance and the bureaucracy surrounding the tracking of insurance, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different insurance plans. And simply tracking which plan is going to cover what consumes 1/3 of our healthcare dollars, which is for this massive insurance bureaucracy. So Medicare for All is simply a simplification so you get rid of that insurance bureaucracy. It doesn't change the individual provision by separate providers. It doesn't actually manage that. It doesn't change that. It's only the insurance which changes. The questions you're raising would apply more to a national health insurance plan, like what Great Britain has. And that's not, many people regard that as kind of an ideal, but it's not something we're ready for right now. We're not advocating for that at this time. There's a fair amount of dialogue and discussion and education that has to go into that, and addressing exactly the kinds of questions that you have. But let me say more generally to those questions, what about this government corporate collusion? Because we did, there was a lot of that going on in COVID, and not just COVID, but in general. I mean, look at Big Pharma and its control over our, reimbursements for drug expenses, for example. The Democrats have long been claiming that we would have this bulk purchasing program. So what did they finally do in the Inflation Reduction Act? They're patting themselves on the back on this great program. Well, this great program is going to amount to, I think it's 10 pharmaceuticals by 2026. And there are thousands of pharmaceuticals. This is just a drop in the bucket. They're really not fixing the problem. And we see that over and over again. I can tell you stories about our effort to implement Medicare for All in my home state through a referendum where, again, wasn't so much government, but it was the industry that slammed the referendum campaign with false advertising, basically, and outspent it 50-1 and beat it back. But we're seeing this in many aspects of healthcare, in all aspects really of regulation, whether it's vaccine policy or whether it is GMOs, whether it is the regulation of the airlines industry, whether it is opioids, and the influence of the Sackler family that basically they basically purchased the permissions that they wanted for fentanyl and opioids and created this mess where 100,000 people are dying every year because they can buy influence. So it has completely eroded our faith in government institutions. There's just been all these disasters. Look at the EPA right now and their cover-up of the East Palestine spill. So, one of our fundamentals in terms of democracy reforms is not only that we have to get the money out of politics so that corporations cannot buy policy, but we also have to close the revolving door so that CEOs are not moving from Monsanto into the FDA where they can then approve GMO foods, because they are going to make a lot of money doing that. So we have to basically clean house and restore the integrity of these institutions. And that's essential for anything, for any healthcare policy or environmental, everything. We need a fundamental reboot of our democracy and the fundamental reforms that we need. But that's not impossible. This isn't rocket science, and there's very strong support for this, even though it never gets mentioned. It's never mentioned as a priority, but this is a major priority for us. I don't think the president has executive authority here, although actually, in terms of the regulatory boards, I don't know, and actually we need to look into that to find out, how much executive authority could the president have to shut down the revolving door, because that would be a big step in the right direction and would begin to, I think, really improve the sense of trust from which we can then begin to implement some reforms.
Yeah, no, I just want to respond really quick because I think that's really, you make a good point there in terms of accountability and things like that, which oftentimes is now being thwarted because specifically because of partisanship, where, Democrats, because of their backing from corporations or big pharma or something like that, they're like, oh, well, we can't attack Fauci because that would expose our own dealings in the
Yes.
background. So how would you, if I could follow up real quick, to kind of I guess break this sort of partisanship up, or this party politics up in order to hold government bureaucrats accountable.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's where we have to have meaningful congressional hearings, as opposed to congressional hearings that are trying to score political points. And I think these concerns are really important. We do need to hold them accountable. That said, let me tell you that when I was in medical school, that kind of manipulation was absolutely, it was the rule. And when I was first in my training, it was debated whether physicians should even tell their patients the nature of their illnesses and their diagnosis. There was just this incredible paternalistic, approach to healthcare, which was just horrific.